get into some of the real big races on the Saturday Churchill Downs Kentucky Derby card. We're up to race number 10. We're going to talk about the Churchill Downs, the grade 1 sprint going 7 furlongs. And anytime we have a big sprint race to discuss, I have to get my buddy Craig Milkowski from Timeform US, who makes the figures over there. And Craig knows quite a bit about these Kentucky Derby packages that are available for DRF, because you can get the Timeform US past performances and lots of tools and features from Timeform US as part of those. Craig, buddy, how's everything going on your end?
Hi, everything's going great here. Before we get started, I got to ask about that intro music. That was awesome.
That's my buddy from high school. We met each other when we were freshmen in our in the summer camp before soccer, and he was one of my best buds all through high school. Still know him now, and we chat and we get to see each other every now and then. But he's a great musician. And so I can just ask him sometimes to do me a little intro, and I'll send him a few bucks now and then, and he, whatever you need. So he gets real excited to do it. And he's super talented. He's one of those guys where like you could put him on levels, because he plays the guitar and he taught himself how to play like all these different instruments too. He just has a real good song and like a real good sense for music. So shout out to Joey, my buddy, Joey Cleveland. He'll get a kick out of getting a plug on this one.
All right. Yeah, I'm going to have to learn how to play that one on guitar. I like that. Now I'll have to start by learning how to actually play guitar, because I have no idea, but no, that was pretty good. I always appreciate talented musicians because it's something I have absolutely no talent with.
I can tell you my son and my girlfriend will let you know about my pitch when I sing. I think I am. I always remind them that I was classically trained and I was in musicals and stuff. So I let them know that, they're dealing with a real serious singer here walking around the house. Craig, I always love chatting the races with you. You do such a great job with Timeform US and with David. I'm always listening to the podcast, the Pacecast, the Forecast, all the stuff that you guys put out. You do the work, and you guys are talking about it from a really good gambling perspective too, trying to beat the favorites as often as you can, looking for value. And what I like about the combination of the two of you, just the way you look at races are different. The way you come to conclusions sometimes can be the same. And that's what's great about handicapping and gambling. You will maybe arrive on a similar horse for totally different reasons, or in some races, completely different horses that you like. But it's a really fun listen every week. You guys are some of my favorite people to listen to. Tell everybody about what the kind of schedule you have going on right now, what that is, before we get into the race.
Well, first, I really appreciate you saying that. David's as sharp a guy as there is out there, so I really have to do my work to be able to hang with him. And I'd say we both have had our hits and misses, but we do our best when we usually land on the same horse, and it's for different reasons. So just something to keep an eye out. This week, I pretty much finished recording, except with you. We did a Derby and an Oaks preview. One about a half hour, one about 20 minutes, I think, just covering all the horses in both races. And then we actually just did our Timeform US forecast, which was about 95% Derby, where we really went in depth on every horse in the field, even the also eligible. So that should be coming out as part of the Derby-thon that DRF is doing. It's just one of those, it's a very tough race. I know we're going to get to that later, so I don't want to go into it too much. But if you want to see that, the easiest place is on the DRF channel on YouTube. We do have video for all of our podcasts now where we show the PPs, and it's a really good tool to actually see what we're talking about. But even without video, it's still very listenable, and you can get those on like Spotify or YouTube, or Apple Podcast, any of those. Just go to the DRF channel.
And what's nice is if people are watching this, and I've got the past performances up for race number 10 that we're going to talk about on Saturday, which is the Churchill Downs Stakes, the 7 furlong grade 1 sprint. What is nice about the all access past performances, so if you're someone like me, I got familiar with the DRF growing up, and then I like to use the formulator past performances. But what I'm doing all the time, because I have the all access ones here, Craig, when I'm looking at races and sometimes I just can't get a feel for it, I'll just quickly look over to Timeform US, and you can take a look at some of the tools they have, the pace projector, really, really fast with one click. And it can just help you, even if you're someone that hasn't been familiar with the past performances and a lot of the information that you guys have there, you can very quickly pick it up, especially when you're looking at the other PPs and referencing them back and forth. And you go, okay, yeah, that was the speed horse. Where do they have them in the pace projector, and back and forth? So it's really nice with the way they have the all access past performances set up, because you can just quickly bounce back and forth and you can understand them very, very quickly and really get a feel for them.
Yeah, one thing I would say is speed figures are not easy to make. They're certainly not as easy as they used to be with the proliferation of turf racing. Means there's less dirt races. There's just so many more classes of horses with all the conditions now. So even as a guy who makes speed figures, I'm going to say that they're imprecise and imperfect. So it never hurts to look at two different sets, because you're going to get two opinions, and, you're going to see some differences from time to time. And that may tell you, hey, maybe whichever speed figure I'm looking at, maybe I want to be skeptical and kind of take that into consideration. And it's something, I mean, I don't do a ton, but I do have it. And there are times when I look and say, hey, I wonder what Bayer did in this case, because I know that was a really tough day. And, I'll go take a look and sometimes get a little different perspective.
Well, let's get into race number 10 on Saturday, the Grade 1 Churchill Downs Stakes. When you have these big sprint races, a lot of the time in the last few years, we've had some top tier sprinters who were sort of heavy favorites at the top of the division. And this particular race is much different than that. There aren't that many real proven top of the line graded stakes sprinters in this race. And that's what makes it kind of competitive and challenging, I think, from a gambling standpoint. Just to start from a discussion standpoint, a couple of the horses that are going to take money and that are really honest. It's, I have Tejano Twist. He's a deep closer, though, so he has to come from way out of it. And surprisingly enough, he hasn't been quite as good at 7, where it just seems like 7 would be the perfect trip for him. You have a horse like the 6 Zozos, who is also cross-centered in another spot, but Zozos was in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile last year. He was only 4-1. His best races have all been right around a mile. Hasn't done a bunch. He doesn't have a bunch of big wins, but he's like super solid. And then, after that, I think towards the outside, you have Hoist the Gold, who won the Cigar Mile. That was very good. He took advantage of a biased racetrack that day, but he has some big races, and he's definitely shown up and been probably the most proven sprinter, I guess, in here over the last couple of years.
Yeah, the last few years, I mean, we've really only had one proven sprinter in Elite Power, the back-to-back Breeders' Cup winner. And I guess that horse that chased him home last year, whose name's escaping me, the Steve Asmussen horse, who was pretty good, but not quite as good as that one. But it seems like in a division that's kind of crying out for a big horse. And I was actually surprised when I went to handicap this race, because one thing that has happened with speed figures is the sprinters used to get really fast figures in the U.S., but as the quality declined the last couple of years, so have the numbers. But this field actually came up pretty strong. I think there's some up-and-coming horses in here. A couple horses you mentioned who, me, I'm very rarely ever going to come on and pick the favorite, and particularly when they have holes like I think all of the top 3 choices do in this race. So
totally
I'm
agree.
Not picking any. I'm not picking any of them, but I think there's some up and coming horses that are pretty good and have some real potential to be pretty good sprinters.
Okay, I know you're a basketball fan. At the end, I'll let you take a shot at me for the Lakers, and I'll give you some praise for the Thunder. But first off, have you seen the movie? And are you ready for the BOA challenge here with Bo Cruz?
I have not. Which movie is
it's
it?
a movie, Hustle, with Adam Sandler on Netflix. Oh, you'll love it. Basketball fan.
Yeah, everybody tells me that, and I just haven't got around to watching it.
Make it a movie night with LC one night. You guys will like it. It's good. It's a good Sandler movie, and it's part of Hernan Gomez plays the guy that Sandler goes and finds as a scout. And so what they do is they try to get him viral online, and this is the character's name, Bo Cruz, in the movie. So he when you're talking about up and coming horses, he's one that just sort of caught my attention because he did win the Commonwealth last time out. You look at his overall body of work, it's pretty good. You can kind of look through his form and think that maybe once he got beyond a mile, it could have been a little bit too far for him. So at 7 furlongs here in a race where we're not necessarily thinking these are the most consistent grade 1 horses. Would you look at a new face like him as a horse who could be competitive here?
Definitely. He's a horse that when I did the forecast when he ran last time, actually David was off that week, and one of your buddies, Barry Spears, was actually on with me.
Mm-hmm.
And we both kind of liked Bo Cruz in that spot. And it was for a little different reason in that we thought he was probably going to have an easy trip up front, which it turned out he did. So, I mean, It was actually decent analysis. But when I looked at him for this race, it's one of those cases where I said, we like them. And normally I would want to dismiss a horse off of that kind of trip, but not him, because I don't really think he's a front runner. I think he's one that just kind of took advantage of the situation. Mm-hmm. But he's still a 4-year-old. He's still lightly raced. He's getting better. And it's one of those rare cases where we adjust the overall number by the pace of the race. Bo Cruz got a 113, and that was heavily discounted from the 120 final time speed figure because of the very slow pace. But I actually think he's a horse who's more likely to run that 120 than he is a 113. He's a horse that I really like cutting back to one turn. He was tried at 2 turns last year. He tried the Matt Win, and he ran fine. He tried the Iowa Derby, and the slop didn't run particularly well. Even came back this year in a route, but when they turned him back to the 1 turn, I really think that's where his future is going to be. And I could see him just running very well again and being competitive in this race. He's actually the horse that's my top pick in here.
Yeah, I think that's where we were going to from just a value standpoint. From the trip he should sit, he's coming into this race third, start off the bench. You just eliminate that race at Prairie Meadows, which was followed by a long layoff. And as you kind of documented his career, I enjoy as a gambler playing horses like this because he makes sense. His form, just overall, there aren't random bad races in there. We talked ourselves into him just really maybe being a nice sprinter where he has a little more punch at 7 furlongs. He sat perfectly off a move to the lead, and he really was strong late in that race. And yeah, I think he's heading in the right direction. I would not be shocked at all to see him take one more step forward. And I thought the pace for this race was just kind of murky, a little bit confusing as far as where we might get it from. I think from the outside, you'll probably get the 11 Hoist the Gold, but that horse is actually cutting back from some longer races, which sometimes can kind of dilute that speed a little bit. But I guess from way out there, they're probably going to have to go.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, you have plenty of time before the turn comes at Churchill, so it's not like you have to gun out of there to get position. But we have him picked in front in the pace projector early on with a pretty clear lead. Maybe they'll go, maybe they won't. I don't know. I think he's probably going to be a little overbet based on his last couple. That Cigar Mile, I mean, that was run over one of the most biased tracks you're ever going to see at Aqueduct. He was just glued to the gold rail. He ran a career best speed figure by quite a bit that day. And then, I mean, really, he ran okay in the Pegasus, I guess. He was a distant 4th after setting a really fast pace at a distance that's just much too long for him. I have no idea why they thought going to Saudi. I guess 20 million reasons is why. Yeah. But, I mean, I never thought he had a prayer in that race, and he didn't really run that way. So I'm against him in here. I just think he's a little bit dressed up. He has those big grade 1s in the Saudi race he's coming out of. But that's not always an easy rebound either, coming back from the Middle East like that. So maybe he'll run well and he could beat me. I wouldn't be shocked if he won, but I just don't see any value in him.
Me neither. Another horse that kind of was fitting the profile as maybe a horse you were talking about. What do we do with the 4 Mr. Wireless, who was better? He was pretty solid and pretty honest, going a little longer, 1 1/16, 1 1/8, in some graded stakes races where he was just under. Actually won back-to-back graded stakes races a few years ago in the Indiana Derby and the West Virginia Derby, and then he didn't really take the step forward right after that. He's taken a little while, but if you're looking at him off of speed figures, he really has grown up and matured kind of from last year to this year. And after he showed up with a big performance this year, they've given him plenty of time to recover. Do we think maybe he could find a home at this 7 furlong distance?
Yeah, he's the other horse I actually like in here. I almost made him my top choice, but I'll get to why I didn't in a second, but he ran really well. He ran a super fast race at the fairgrounds when he cut back to one turn for the first time in quite a while. He had won a one-turn mile at Churchill, but it was his first time actually sprinting, I think, since his career debut. And he's always struck me as a horse who probably wanted to go shorter, but he had that early success as a 3-year-old in those kind of minor derbies, but purse-wise not minor, in Indiana and West Virginia.
Sure.
He actually came here to my home track of Remington and ran in the Derby and took quite a bit of money that day, but didn't really show up. And I think because of that, they kind of kept him running in the tougher races. But last time off the long layoff, when Brett Calhoun finally cut him back to that sprint distance, he was just so good. It was a really fast race. Our final time figure for that race was a 1:28. He actually, the overall numbers cut down to a 1:20 because of how slow the pace was. But unlike Beau Cruz, it's a race where he was off the pace. Now, he wasn't way off the pace. He was sitting mid-pack, a couple lengths back, and just made an eye-catching run to just blow away some other horses in that field. The one concern I have about that is the 3 horses who have run back from that race just have not run very well at all. So it makes me question the speed figure a little bit, but I'm still fairly confident in it because it's not like those horses hadn't run fast before. They all had, and they had run. Matter of fact, Mr. Wireless was 8-1 in that day because of how strong the field looked. And there were other horses who were just as fast and had done so sprinting. So I'm not saying
he handled them too, right? And
he destroyed them.
It wasn't like they were right on the like he took them to school in that field. So those are to me, just looking at the way the race could shape up with having the knocks on the others, I gravitated to the same 2 as thinking that they would provide the most value, have the most upside in here. While Mr. Wireless is a 6, it's kind of a 6-year-old. It's kind of funny because like you pointed out, he spent basically all of his career going longer. You kind of look at him like a new horse in sprinting now.
Yeah, for sure. And that's exactly what I saw. I mean, he won his first 2, he didn't win. He started in a sprint. Then he broke his maiden going a mile at Oaklawn. And like I said, he had some success, but the way he ran in that last race just makes me think this horse looks like one of those powerful sprinters, particularly the way he was able to overcome a slow pace. So I'm really glad they're giving him another shot, because I was wondering when he came off the long layoff in a sprint if it was just going to be a prep, send him back going long again. But I think he ran so well, he kind of earned this spot and maybe opened up the Connections' eyes a little bit.
Exactly. And if that was the case, like great job by the Connections, because that's what you have to do. We were just talking like about basketball, right? You have to watch what your athlete can do and be able to put them in a place to succeed and be ready to call an audible. And if they had plans to want to get this horse going longer, and then they look around and go, that was such a good race, we earned such a good number, let's give him some time off. There's not a bunch of horses in this division right now that we're scared of. We could be a major player here if this horse runs another good race or 2 sprinting. So it just, win or lose, the spot makes a lot of sense for this horse. And if he's 5-1 and above, super playable in this race.
Yeah, and that's really it for me in this race. Those 2,
me too.
I'll possibly play them both to win. Depends what the odds are. If they're around their morning line, I would, but I'll definitely be playing exactas with those 2.
And it's a nice.
Just don't trust the favorites. Yeah, we didn't talk about Zozos. I think he might actually be the morning
line favorite at 3-1, sort of lukewarm 3-1. He was 4-1 in the dirt mile, and he'd put together some good races last year. He won the Knicks Go Stakes on the undercard. When he started his started his middle of the season campaign there, and he put together a few victories, but I've never thought he was that good, and this field isn't necessarily the most scary field. I need to see another race for him. I really do think he's more of one of those horses that is more of a miler, because I think he wants to be close to a slower pace.
Yes, that's what I would agree with. I guess the upside with him is he did win first time out. Then he had a long layoff after the Derby. He won first time off that layoff.
Sure.
Now he's coming off a
big race is fresh, right?
maybe that would be the upside, but I tend to view him more as a two-turn horse who wants to be up front,
Mhm.
and I don't really see that happening here. He's probably going to get shuffled back, and not a big fan of that for him, particularly at a short price.
Yeah, as far as like as a horse, what's good for him going forward, he could get a lot out of this race. I just think he may have to work a little too hard early on for his liking. Even like just how he had to work in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile last time out, just going a little too quick where he has to work early. I like that could get him a lot of stamina for his next start. But if he's anywhere around 3-1, and he's probably going to be because of the connections and because the bettors are going to look for someone to grab onto. That's kind of why you were pointing out you thought the 11 might get overplayed just because of the races he exits and the Cigar Mile.
Yeah, there's one other horse I wanted to mention as well. That's kind of my crazy long shot in here, and that's the inside horse, Raise Cane. And it's not that I really love him in here, but he's a horse who had run very well winning the Perryville at Keeneland. He's another who's just a 4-year-old. And since that time, he's basically had 2 races where he had absolutely 0 chance of winning. One was the Malibu, which was pretty speed biased track that day. There was very little pace in there, and it was dominated by a couple Bob Bafferts on the front end. He is definitely more of a closing type. And then he came back in that Commonwealth one by Bo Cruz, and kind of similar. There was just no pace whatsoever. And he's a horse that's going to need some pace. No guarantee he can get back to that Perryville form because his last 2 look pretty ugly, but I would expect an improved race from him. Good enough to win or not, I don't know, but I would definitely use him in some of my vertical plays.
Yeah, I have him on the bottom of exotics too, Craig. What you can do with him is very similar to what we were doing with Mr. Wireless also, right? You look at a lot of those races going longer, and you just assume because he would kind of drop back that he would be fine going those longer distances. And he was second in the Indiana Derby, and he wasn't beaten a whole lot in the Oklahoma Derby, and he ran some good races going longer. But if you just eliminate the 1 1/8 and 1 1/16 races and the Derby, and you focus in on the races just up to a mile where he wins the Gotham and then the 7 furlong races, his form, like you can see better races there. And I would not be shocked again for him to finally putting 2 starts together after a couple disappointing races in his last few. He ran into Speedboat Beach last 2 starts back, who's really quick and a pretty nice horse. And then the race shape didn't get there last time. You can really talk yourself into him running a lot better in here at a price. As you pointed out, is it good enough to win? Who knows? But at 20-1, at least for some underneath in exotics.
Yeah, for sure. And that's how I'm looking at it. So anytime I don't really particularly like the favorites in a race, I'm going to try to take advantage of that in as many pools as I can. So this is a race I will definitely be playing vertically. I probably won't play horizontal bets on the Derby card just because the races are just so deep.
They're
and
hard.
contentious.
Right? Yeah.
I have
right
no
4
interest
times.
in spending $1,000 on a pick 5 ticket that I think it would probably take that to have a reasonable chance to cash. But I think you can go shorter in some of these verticals and you can hit some scores with the size of these pools.
Yeah, or if you're someone who is looking to play these late exotics, it's nice to know there's a race that for me, I'd be super comfortable playing a pick 4 or pick 5 with the 2 that we mentioned, 3 and 4. And like hoping that I'm right about this race with one of those 2 and get a little separation, because this will probably be a spread out race where I think a lot of people will want to defensively use some of those horses that we mentioned that we don't really love in here that are fine. Tano Twist, Hoist the Gold, Zozos, any of them could win, but they'll be shorter than they probably should for their chance of winning this race at this time. And it's nice that we have a little stronger opinion at horses that can be maybe double the price of them. So, Craig, we will agree and hopefully be on the same page there, right up the gut with the 3 and the 4 with Bo Cruz and with Mr. Wireless, the 2 of them. So as we finish up with the Churchill Downs, let's talk about Friday. So I think I said this exact same joke to David, so I'll say it again for the people that didn't hear it. Let's get back in the DeLorean and go to Friday and take a look at the field for the Kentucky Oaks. So I got to get somebody new to write some material for me. When I'm doing so much handicapping, I'm not working on the new joke material. Just give me a thought or two on the field lined up. 5 horses between 7-2 and 5-1 on the morning line. They had a challenging time just figuring it out, but I love how the race set up. And this is what we want from Oaks, Derby, Breeders' Cup kinds of races, where you feel like you have the best horses from all the different circuits, and they all kind of get to show up and come together and see who gets the best trip on the big day.
Yeah, one thing I've learned being morning line maker for NYRA probably 3 or 4 weeks now, and I have another week coming up over Memorial Day, is I'm much nicer to morning line makers because it's a pretty thankless job and a very difficult job, particularly in these days where the wagering is kind of dominated by CAWs, and you kind of, I mean, I just don't even know how you predict who they're going to bet sometimes. I mean, I have a pretty good idea, but I get it wrong too, plenty. So very tough job. So I'm not going to certainly knock the morning line on a race like this, which is very difficult. We have a full field of 14, a couple also eligibles who even they're not impossible. But I would say of those 14 entered, I could probably make a strong case for half the field in here.
Seriously.
I think there's 7 of them that I think could win. I wound up settling on the 5-horse Torpedo Anna as my top pick when I did our video preview. If I'm going to bet her or not, I can't say because I really don't know what kind of price she's going to be. If she drifts down to 7-2, I don't want her. If she's 6 or 8-1, yeah, I'm definitely going to bet her. And
someone's going to have to float up, right? And that's going to have to happen with a few of these horses that are going to float down and a few float up. And that might be the way. I know it's hard because we all love playing the pick 4s and pick 5s, but if we're really playing this race, I think the smart way would be individually heavily, so you could see what the odds boards look like and then be able to really make a determination on which of these horses get forgotten about. Because Torpedo Anna, who you pointed out, she might be the horse that I'm convinced, or I feel the most that she's going to get a good trip because she's drawn more towards the inside. And if she wants to get that sort of stalking trip just off, 4 or 5 of the horses outside of her want that same trip, and they won't all be able to get it. She might at least be able to get that. But wow, it's as fun and as deep of an Oaks as you could ask for, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's look, the Oaks isn't the Derby, but it certainly became just a very important race. I mean, there was a time when I got into the game where the Oaks was, I don't even think it was a grade 1. It was just a grade 2, and it didn't draw the strongest field. It was more about the NYRA Triple T era at the time, but it's become a worthy not counterpart, but a co-race to the Derby, co-feature almost.
Yeah.
And certainly this one lives up to it because there's just so many directions you could go. I mean, a horse like Power Squeeze, who is actually one I got a little lucky on last time. I loved her in the Gulfstream Park Oaks. And I would be the first to sit here and tell you she probably wasn't the best horse that day, but she got the job done. And she's one who's absolutely going to love this 1 1/8. I think she's going to like Churchill Downs more.
Shouldn't have a problem sitting a little wide if she needs to either, I don't think.
No, she's one who's dropped back when she needs to. She's shown tactical speed. She's just a really solid filly, and she's one I'm pretty sure is going to be a price. Just FYI is what the breeders, she's the Eclipse winner for 2-year-old fillies. There was absolutely nothing wrong with her return race. I think it was more the ends to a means to get here to the Oaks. I don't think she by any stretch left it out on the track, but
she was kind of late getting to that race too, right? So she probably really took a lot out of that race because I think it was just like a small sickness or something that backed her up one prep. And so, yeah, she probably gets a lot out of that race versus Leslie's Rose, who probably got more of the perfect trip in there. And she's still really good, but I don't know if she'll get to save ground like she did and angle out from way out there in post 14.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the reason I picked Torpedo Anna on top was because of what you said, and it's post position. Post is a little more important in the Oaks. It's a shorter run into the first turn, and a lot of the main contenders are drawn pretty far outside, and they're going to have to work out trips where I think Torpedo Anna will get a trip. Where's My Ring's another one who just
Yeah.
broke her maiden in the Gazelle, but she's just as fast as any of the fillies in here. She's probably going to be a price and save some ground. So I do think it's an open race, a fascinating betting race, and one I'll be looking forward to seeing the odds. And I will definitely have a wager. I wish I could swear to you what they're going to be, but I just don't see it that way. As opposed to like the Churchill Downs Sprint, the two horses I like the most, I know are going to be prices. So I
Yep.
already know
Yeah.
what I'm going to bet in there. A race like this, I just don't know. So I like to stay pretty flexible.
And in the Derby, there's the top tier of betting choices with the Speedy Fierceness to the outside, who's 5-2, and then Sierra Leone, who I go back. I always say Leone, and then I'll say Leone, and then Sierra Leone, and the dyslexia will just kind of slip in, and then we'll talk about that one who's 3-1. Your partner David made I think a really fun point about the two of them. Not only are they so different with their running styles, but just sort of like the horse that they are and what they've done. Sierra Leone is really consistent. You know exactly what you're going to get from him. He's going to drop way out of it. He's going to come running. He will almost always come and get you. He lost on a biased track, but he builds it up, and he is like a machine. And then on the opposite side, you have Fierceness, who's Jekyll and Hyde. You know, you don't really know what you're going to get from him. He could be remarkable or throw in one of those clunkers if he doesn't get the ideal circumstances. So not only with their running styles, but also with just kind of their demeanor and what we've seen from them, they're just two totally opposite types of horses.
They are, and you kind of hit the nail on the head. Now, I'm not betting either one of them because I just don't want short prices on a race like the Derby. And let's be honest, it's a race. You can make a life-changing score in one race on this particular race. And I think both of them have, some falls. Fierceness, we've talked about he has 3 wins in which he had just picture-perfect trips. The Florida Derby, yes, he ran very fast. I gave him a fast speed figure just like everybody else. But honestly, I think it was a pretty stinky race. There was really no one in there that could challenge him. He went wire to wire all by himself. The Breeders' Cup Juvenile was a race where, yes, he sat outside of the Chad Brown horse, whose name I'm forgetting, but they were actually going really slow, and he was in the clear, took over. Nobody challenged him yet again. His maiden win, he went right to the front, drew away. Every time this horse has faced adversity, well, both times, he's run not just bad, but terribly. And I just don't want to bet a horse at a short price like that in the Derby because he's not going to get an easy trip. Very rarely does anyone get an easy trip in the Derby. So I don't want him. And Sierra Leone, yeah, he's been very good. I trust him a lot more. I think I picked him second, and I probably would use him in some of my vertical plays. But this horse, a deep closer, he's going to be 18th, 19th, 20th early. He drew inside, so he's likely to be pinned inside. There's a lot of other closers just to his outside who are probably going to be in front of him, who may be able to beat him to some of the holes. So he's going to have to be really, really good to win. And he had a dream trip in the Bluegrass as well. I mean, it was just a blazing fast pace.
His stablemate set it up for him nicely.
Yeah, he dropped back to basically last while his top Connor, I believe, was his unofficial rabbit for that race. And he got a great setup, but he didn't run particularly fast. I mean, his speed figure just kind of matches everybody else in the field. So he can win the race. I'm not interested in a horse like him at 3-1 in a 20-horse field. So all that said, I have some very bad news for you. I've seen your Derby.
I was just going to tell you the same thing.
Channel.
I was going to tell you, I'm on the email chain now since I'm doing some work for DRF. So I see some of the picks come in too. And I said, oh no, you're going to be in trouble, Craig.
Yeah, it looks like we've landed on the same horse in Catching Freedom. And it's kind of interesting. I've seen a lot of people talk about his Risen Star, where he was beaten pretty decisively by Sierra Leone that day, and even Track Phantom finished ahead of him. But I remember watching that race live, and even though I didn't bet, I think I did. I don't think I even bet the race, to be honest. I know I picked Sierra Leone that day, was right for a change on that one. But I think he was pretty heavily bet. I really don't remember the odds. But as I watched that race, my first thought was if Catching Freedom could ever figure it out and run straight, he may very well have been the best horse in the race. But that's always an iffy proposition with 3-year-olds because a lot of times they don't figure it out. But in the Louisiana Derby, he figured it out. He looked like a totally different horse. He changed leads. He ran more straight. I won't say he ran perfectly straight, but he ran straighter than he had in the past. Mm-hmm. And he just seemed like a horse that the light finally went on. Brad Cox got him figured out. And he's a closer in a race that I think is going to have a very fast pace, which again is part of why I don't like Fearlessness, but not Fearlessness. I said that wrong. Fierceness.
You were combining a couple horses, right? Fearless,
yes,
Fierceness.
Yes.
The two of them, put them together, and we got Fearlessness. There we go. Yeah.
That's what happens for our younger listeners when you're about to turn 57.
1,572,000 races throughout your lifetime, so it's okay. We'll give you a pass.
Yes. But I think it's a race that's going to fall apart. I think Catching Freedom is going to get a very good trip. And I just think he's the closer that I trust the most to run his best race. And on top of that, he's being ridden by Flavien Prat, who just has a stellar record in the Kentucky Derby. If you look at the mounts he's had and where they finished, and even more importantly, go watch the trips he's given to his mounts. He just seems to get this race and not find trouble. So I trust him more than the other closer. So Catching Freedom was my top pick over Sierra Leone.
And the thing with Pratt that you were mentioning, when you're a rider, and it's like when you're playing baseball, when you're riding so many races, we're using similar percentages. 20, 30 means you're awesome. That's incredible. You're going to be losing a lot of the time. I rarely am seeing Pratt in situations where he's the reason a horse lost. There's so many times where your horse isn't good enough, or, the circumstances didn't give you a chance there. But there are very few times where I'm like, gosh, that was his fault. He does just seem to, I trust him so much overall as a rider. And what I was noticing too in doing the work just last week and kind of we know we followed along with these horses, but I love how you pointed it out. Like when you're watching these horses the day of, your mind is different because you might be involved in a wager with them and you might be looking at things a little differently. And then you kind of recap it the next day. And so you're sort of looking at it then, and then you're kind of handicapping the race and you may be looking at it like a different way then. And he may not have been a horse who I said like that day I was going to pick. I've always kind of liked him. I thought he was sort of like a workman-like horse, which is funny because he's a big purchase price. It's not like he was a horse that he was supposed to be good, but Cox never really seemed like he thought he was the best of his horses. And I sort of like that because he's just continued to improve, as you pointed out. And you watch his races, you see it. I also think he's not like Sierra Leone, where I'm not expecting him to be 18, 19, 20. He can be more 12, 10 to 15 in that range, where in some of his races, he's only been 4 lengths out. He's like 8th at the back of a leading group, or, just a little more tactical, a horse who I think they can ask a couple times, get position here. Okay, settle. Okay, let's move again, settle. I don't know if you can do that with Sierra Leone. I think once you press the button with him and he starts rolling, like that's it, right? I don't know if you're going to be able to ask him a bunch of times. So he feels like the horse that we both have landed on. And I actually think, do we have the same top 2, 4-2? You put Sierra Leone in second too, right?
Yes, I had 4-2, and then I went with Honor Marie third, and I want to say Mystic Dan fourth, though I was really torn between Mystic Dan and Forever Young. I could have went with either. I went with the bigger price, but it's a race I'm fully expecting kind of a pace meltdown. That's why all of my top 4 are composed of horses I think are going to be coming from off the pace.
Yeah, Forever Young is going to be in the mix for me too, in like exotics and anything I'm playing. Just such a wild card. And I do like the fact that I think as we've gotten closer to the Derby, there's been less buzz around him. Like a couple months ago, he was more of a buzzy horse, I think, and he hasn't been as much of the wise guy horse leading in, which I like. He feels like he's floating a little bit more under the radar. In his 2 trips in his last couple of races, I thought they were very good to possibly set him up for the type of trip he could get in this race, where he had to go 3 and 4 wide almost all the way around. And that's what you have to do in the Derby a lot of times. So it's almost like he's gotten himself primed for the trip he might need in a field of 20, what he had to do in the Saudi Derby and then what he had to do in the UAE Derby. So I know David had him as his top pick, right?
He did. I was actually more impressed with his race in Saudi. I talked about this on the show with David. I didn't think really much of the field that showed up in Dubai.
No.
But Bookham Dano, who he did beat, is actually a really fast horse here in the States. I don't think he's Derby eligible. I mean, not that he had the points, but I don't think he was even nominated. But he's a horse who has run some real speed figures, and also a horse who has he ran very well that day. I mean, it looked like he had that Saudi Derby wrapped up, and
Forever Young was done. Right? He was like kind of spinning his wheels there. That was one of those when people say, oh, they won on class. That would, to me, look like a horse that didn't really want to win, but is just so good they figured a way out to do it.
Yeah, he was just relentless that day. He just refused to stop and kept coming. And I was impressed with that race at a distance, which was probably much too short for him. So, and if people want to know how good Bookham Dano is, I'm sure some remember him. Maybe he's been forgotten, but all you have to do is look at West Saratoga's PPs in the Derby and look at the race 3 back. Not that West Saratoga is any strong contender in the Derby, but he got dusted by Bookham Dano by a full dozen lengths that day. Just absolutely toyed with the field. So he's a good horse, and Forever Young was able to just go get him, even though it seemed like he wasn't going to be able to. So sooner or later, a horse from Japan is going to win the Kentucky Derby, no matter what you might see on the X or wherever else you're hearing this. They're too good over there. Yeah. Their horses have proven on the world stage. It may not be this year, it may not be next year, but I don't think it's going to be 50 years from now either. It's going to be sooner rather than later.
Yeah, the program, they just start from the bottom up. They build their programs from the breeding so well, strong programs. And I have this one. I've heard it a few times. I think this is their best shot so far. I think this horse in the race here, the way it may shape up, like him in this race, I think this has been their best shot so far. We'll see what happens on Saturday. Craig, before we let you go, I have to give you credit, and I have to tell you, I'm rooting for the Oklahoma City Thunder, man. I've really liked the group of young guys they've had and they put together. And I was a fan of Shea with the Clippers. So when they traded him over there, I knew right away that was a bad move for the Clippers, because I didn't think they were upgrading that much from him to Paul George as it was. And then all the other assets they had to put in. And I figured Oklahoma would be able to take steps, but wow, they took a big step, I think, this year, farther than anyone ever thought. They felt like they would be a playoff team and in the mix, but they end up getting the number 1 seed. And what that does, it puts you in a great spot. You get to play a team like the Pelicans, who are a little depleted, and you get to put yourself in a really nice situation. So you earned it there. How do you feel right now as a fan who hasn't been in the spot for a few years now with like a legitimate contending team?
Yeah, it's I mean, I'm not just a fan. I've been a season ticket holder along with my wife. Yeah, since 2008. We've probably missed 20 games maybe in all those years, other than obviously the COVID year where nobody was allowed to go. Our daughter actually works for the Thunder on the business side of things. So yeah, we're about as diehard as you can get. And I'll always be a huge Paul George fan, because him demanding a trade kind of just turned the whole franchise around. I mean, for one, as much as I love the Thunder, there was nothing worse than watching the Russell Westbrook, Paul George, and Carmelo Anthony teams play basketball. It was just, it was brutal basketball to watch. They won some, but they couldn't win the playoffs. And I mean, if you ended the Paul George trade right now, we already have Shea and Jalen Williams, J-Dub, the better player of the two. They're both pretty good. And I mean, they're two probable superstars going forward. I mean, it's pretty incredible. They're still young. I don't expect them to go all the way this year. I won't be surprised if they lose in the next round. I'm really hoping the Clippers win, because I think they would beat them. I'm not so sure about Dallas with their 2 superstars right now. But I'm not saying they can't beat them, because maybe they will. Getting by whoever wins out of Denver and Minnesota would be very tough. The Celtics would obviously be super tough, but just to be in this position when only 2 years ago, I mean, there were people in the national media just mocking the Thunder like they were the first team to ever, just rebuild
Tank
and
or
kind of
try to
tank.
rebuild through that. There were a
But I
lot of
mean,
teams doing that. And it was funny when your team
yeah.
was trying to tank some years, you were almost too good in situations where you would still win. And you could sense right then that a lot of these guys, Shea's just a little different, and that's what you need. You need a little bit of luck, but you need to get one of those guys to build around who can be in that top 10 group. And that's what Shea is. And what's nice, he's a two-way player, both sides of the ball. He seems just like a really good teammate too. He just doesn't seem like the guys around him dislike him at all. There's just a lot of positive energy coming out there. And, looking at the way it sets up, I think the team that wins maybe the Minnesota Denver series, if they're healthy, they might be a little too big for Oklahoma. That might be the difference. They may be able to wear you guys down size wise, but yeah, I think the next round through, you'll be able to match up pretty well with whomever. They're like the Clippers with Zubac don't give you too much size. And even with Dallas, I think that's a little more of your problem. And it's nice. You'll be able to kick back and relax there. And, as a fan, it's so nice to be able to root for your team when they're trying to win. It stinks when they're trying to tank. I went through it for a few years too. It's a bummer because you get so conflicted. It was like, am I rooting for my team to lose here? Because I know it's better for their future. This is so everything that I've been against, been raised against. But my team, their season got finished last night. But I will say, you know what? I was pretty pleased with the effort. They didn't play well all the time, but they played hard all the time in this series. And I think they led 76% of the time. They got beat on 2 buzzer beaters. So again, as a fan, it's when you see your team kind of give up and wave the white flag at the end of the year, it stinks. You hate that feeling. I love that they went out and they gave it the best punch, and they just felt like they were a guy down, like they were missing one guy to match up with Denver. They were always Denver was playing with like 3 and we were playing with 2 most nights in situations like that. But I thought I was going to be more frustrated. And honestly, I was super pleased with the fact that they came out and really played hard. And that probably means they won't necessarily, if LeBron still wants to play, that'll obviously depend on everything, but that was better than giving up. And we see a lot of teams in the final game get beat by like 30 and 40 sometimes when they can just sense their season is over. And that's it just leaves such a bad taste in your mouth as a fan when it ends that way.
Yeah, I was impressed with the Lakers, particularly LeBron. I mean, I'm not the biggest LeBron fan, mostly because he's a Laker, but to do what he's doing at his age is incredible. Yeah, it's insane. I mean, he's still one of the best players on the floor, no matter who they're playing against. But at the end of the day, the Lakers have issues because they're paying one very old guy and one guy who's injured a lot, a ton of money, and they just can't really build around them. And that used to work in the old days. I'm not sure that's going to work too much anymore, the way the game is played. You just have to have a more well-rounded, deep team. And we saw that in Phoenix too. I mean, they had put 3 superstars out there and basically a bunch of mediocre players, and they were terrible all year. They made the playoffs just because of the stars and just got run out of the building. The game has changed for sure.
We see the eras, right? Eras flip.
Yeah.
And you used to need to have 2 like top stars to be able to match the other 2 guys in a playoff series. You just used to have to have that. And if you didn't have a couple of guys that were at least on that level, you just had no chance. Now, right away, the depth is more important. You have to have 7 guys or 8. You have to be able to have like a little bit of a big look and then a smaller look, because you're going to face teams that are different. And the league got really small a few years ago. And then what ends up happening, a guy like Jokic comes out of nowhere. And now you got to be able to go big to deal with him a little bit too. So love this time of the year in basketball. The first couple rounds of the playoffs are really fun because you get to see these teams kind of counter every other day and what happens. And looking forward to your Thunder and the next series they come up. So you have the Derby preview recorded. You have other stuff coming out for podcasts coming out later this week. Is that for you and David?
Yeah, we're about done. We did the really long Derby one that will be part of the Derby-thon or whatever they're calling that thing at DRF. I hope the bosses aren't listening because I don't remember. But yeah, it's like 24 hours of Derby talk. We did the Oaks, and that'll be about it for us, at least for me. We'll sit back and watch the races, and we'll be back on Tuesday to talk about and recap everything that we saw, with obviously a focus on the Derby and Oaks. But yeah, we go Tuesday, talk about all the speed figures, everything that happened, what we think it'll mean going forward. And then on Fridays, we do the podcast where we generally do a pick 5 sequence. It was a little different this week as we just focused on the Derby, but that is our normal schedule. And we both really enjoy doing it. So I hope that comes through when people listen.
Craig, you and I would sit here and talk racing and basketball and sports for a long time. It was such a pleasure to get to meet you in person a couple times now. So I think we've had it yearly. I got to see you a few years ago when we came out to Oklahoma for my friend's wedding, and then just for a minute at the Breeders' Cup. But we'll have to at least make it a yearly occurrence where we get the chance to meet up at some point through the years, and hopefully at a track or for a big racing day coming up. Hope you and the wife have a great weekend. You and your family have a great one. Good luck to you with all of your plays. Good luck with all your work. And thanks again, man. Always a blast talking with you.
Yeah, thanks, Gino. Always a pleasure to be on. Ask anytime. I'm happy to join you.
Folks, we will continue along on Saturday. And coming up next, race number 11, it's the Turf Classic. Chris Larmy is going to join me to analyze that race. And we will get you all set up for the Kentucky Derby. Don't go anywhere if you're listening on the podcast. If you're watching on the videos, subscribe on YouTube. Throw a like on that. That helps get the videos shared around. Thanks so much, everyone.